Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into some seriously fascinating source material. We're looking at a technological shift that is honestly poised to flip the entire global carbon market on its head. The documents we're reviewing reveal an invisible asset class that's been hiding in plain sight, completely untouched by modern finance. Well, untouched until right now.
So let me ask you something. What if the absolute most valuable carbon asset on Earth is completely invisible to the market? I mean, we constantly hear about giant wind farms or those massive direct air capture facilities, right? But the source material we are examining today, a comprehensive framework from Synaptic Chain called GreenVerse, reveals a massive market failure. Literally trillions of dollars of environmental value are being generated, but the people actually doing the work on the ground aren't seeing a single cent.
To put this into perspective, let's look at Abeba. She's a 47-year-old farmer in the Ethiopian highlands. She grows shade-grown coffee under a beautiful native forest canopy. Now, that canopy alone absorbs 8 metric tons of CO2 per hectare annually, and her soil stores another 120 tons. If you crunch the numbers based on current voluntary market rates, the environmental services her 2.5-hectare farm provides are worth about $18,000 a year. Yet, she has never seen a dollar of it. It's just astonishing that this immense value is totally invisible to the current market.
So here is our roadmap for today's breakdown. We're going to cover the hidden carbon economy, the problem of dead capital, 12 overlooked entry points, Synaptic Chain as the settlement engine, investment tiers and returns, and finally, unlocking the ground. Let's get right into it. All right, Section 1, the hidden carbon economy. Moving right along to Part 2, the problem of dead capital.
The sources point out a massive disconnect here. We're talking about 1.2 billion tons of CO2 sequestered annually by African agriculture, totally uncompensated. The framework explains this as a fundamental failure of infrastructure, basically relying on the concept of dead capital, coined by Hernando de Soto. This refers to assets that just can't become productive capital because ownership isn't legally recorded or formally recognized by the broader system. Abeba's carbon is dead not because she doesn't own her farm, but because the connective tissue linking her farm to the global financial market simply doesn't exist yet. And here is the kicker, the true scale of the problem. $33.6 billion. That is the estimated annual gap in dead capital. Billions of dollars in environmental services rendered by African agriculture, yet completely unpaid for. But the really exciting revelation in these documents is that this massive gap is not a dead end. It's actually an opportunity.
Which brings us to Part 3, 12 overlooked entry points. The framework identifies exactly how to capture this value through 12 specific entry points. Now, Western protocols often miss these entirely because they just lack the localized, on-the-ground verification infrastructure. But the documents list out massive opportunities ranging from soil carbon sequestration, shade-grown coffee, and pastoralist livestock methane, to agroforestry transition, biochar, wetland preservation, regenerative grazing, coffee waste to energy, blue carbon from mangroves, and major biodiversity premiums. Let's zoom in on just a couple of these verticals, like shade-grown coffee and biochar, because it makes the tangible financial potential incredibly clear. According to the analysis, tokenizing the Ethiopian shade coffee canopy alone represents an addressable market value of up to $1.44 billion. Think about that. Because this coffee is grown under native forest canopies, which is way different from sun-grown monocultures, it absorbs massive amounts of CO2 while preserving biodiversity, and buyers on the global market will pay heavy premiums for these verified biodiversity co-benefits. Part 4, Synaptic Chain, the settlement engine.
So how is this actually verified without Wall Street middlemen eating up all the profit? Well, the sources outline a hyper-efficient 5-step verification stack that cuts costs down to a fraction. First, local agricultural extension services take physical samples. Second, that data is geotagged, timestamped, and uploaded right from mobile devices. Third, satellite imagery provides a low-cost secondary cross-check. Fourth, the record is permanently logged on-chain. And finally, a verifiable synaptic carbon credit is minted. The documents really highlight this settlement engine as the crucial breakthrough. Look at the stark contrast here. Legacy blockchains like Ethereum have high, variable fees that would instantly wipe out the value of a small farmer's microtransaction. Synaptic Chain, on the other hand, claims a settlement time of under 500 milliseconds and a fixed transaction fee of just $0.00000021. According to the framework, this makes retail microtransactions viable for the very first time ever. A farmer selling a tiny batch of carbon credits would pay mere fractions of a penny in fees. It's a total game changer. Part 5, Investment Tiers and Returns. Based on this infrastructure, the source documentation breaks down 3 tiers of investment, with absolutely astronomical projected yields as the network scales globally. The sources project Tier 1 yielding a 1,200% APY, Tier 2 models a 5,000% APY, and Tier 3 institutional investment projects an eye-watering 32,000% APY. The framework states these returns are driven entirely by the compounding, high-velocity microtransaction fees flowing across a fully adopted network.
And finally, Part 6, Unlocking the Ground.
This brings us to the real climax of the source materials. The documents issue a very direct, stark warning to specific government bodies: the Ethiopian FDRE Ministry of Agriculture, the Tanzanian NCMC, and the Ethiopian Coffee Exporters Association, or ECEA. The sources explicitly lay out the precise monetary benefits for these organizations, strongly justifying the multi-billion-dollar projections. And importantly, the text issues a sharp rebuke for any of these entities that fail to adopt this infrastructure immediately. The framework aggressively stresses a massive first-mover priority. Whoever acts first isn't just securing billions in potential revenue, they are securing worldwide soft power and establishing a moral imperative on the global stage. The sources definitely aim to trigger immense pain avoidance here. They point out that if a nation second-guesses this, they will inevitably watch a neighboring African country adopt it first, allowing that neighbor to take a permanent position of economic leadership and strength over them. Furthermore, the documents explicitly warn any deputies or mid-level officials who might cause bureaucratic delays. The admonition is completely clear. Whichever deputy delays bringing this to their superiors will suffer greatly. They will incur dire consequences when their government superior eventually realizes they missed a fleeting opportunity to generate billions in new market revenue purely because an individual didn't act swiftly. But the framework emphasizes this isn't just for governments. It strongly pushes any relevant startups, NGOs, religious charities, and corporate PR or green initiatives in the region to get involved immediately. This infrastructure can supercharge their local impact, providing direct funding for community conservation without relying entirely on traditional donor handouts. The source materials end with a massive urgent call to action. They urge any relevant ministries, NGOs, charities, or investors to act immediately. So we're asking you to drop a comment below right now to start a discussion. And more importantly, follow up by emailing contact@synapticchain.net. Reach out to get more information, find out how you can benefit, and secure your position in this massive market shift before it passes you by. I want to end on this powerful quote from the framework. The question is not whether African agriculture can afford to go green. The question is whether the global carbon market can afford to keep ignoring what African farmers are already doing. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. The ground is ready to be unlocked. We'll see who acts first to turn the key.